What if I told you sport is absolutely pointless and has no purpose outside of itself? But that isn't a bad thing, and that sport can be enjoyed because of that. What is good, YouTube? My name is Ash Porter, and today we are looking at this thing, a brief theology of sport by none other than Lincoln Harvey. Now, Lincoln Harvey is a bold, middle-aged Arsenal fan who just happens to be semi-decent at theology. Now, I'm actually joking where I say, well, that does describe him. But he is incredible at theology, and I say that because I know the author of the book on the channel. This is great. I know Lincoln, and so I can say stuff like that. Lincoln Harvey was mine and Steph's tutor while we were at uni doing our degrees in theology. We know him really well to the point where we actually had him do a reading at our wedding. We spent a lot of time with him. He was so good to us, and despite the fact he's an Arsenal season ticket holder, which, to be honest, he's bought his own pain really, hasn't he? We still love him and we think he's great. And I was so excited after, hearing him lecture and all this kind of stuff and knowing him as a person to finally get round to reading one of his books about a shared passion of ours, which is sport. However, one thing I do want to say is, it was actually quite scary thinking of doing this video because Lincoln's really clever, right? And this book is actually really good and has got some great stuff in. And it's the first time that I've been scared that I'm gonna get it wrong on the video. So Lincoln, if you're watching, please don't judge me. This book is split into two parts. The first part is history, and it looks at historically how has the Christian church, because this is Christian theology we're looking at here, engaged with sport in the past. What's it done with it? Does it like it? Does it not? How has it engaged with that? And then the second part is Lincoln's own theological reflections, drawing on other sources on how we should handle and engage with sport today. If you're into sport and theology and other stuff like that, I really do recommend this book, though I will say it is quite a niche book, so maybe if those aren't interests of yours, for your own sake, maybe don't delve into it. So let's get into the key information that stood out to me. We're going to split this section into the two parts of the book, the historical stuff first and then the reflections second. And just to give a bit of warning, like I said earlier, this book is intense. He is a really clever guy, a PhD in theology, and there is some big concepts in here, and sometimes, if I'm being honest, my little brain can't always handle it. So if I do get stuff wrong, I apologise, but also the reality is you're always going to learn the most probably from reading the book yourself. So go pick up a copy and read it. However, I will try my best. And let's get into it. Right back from the beginning of Christianity, sport has always had a funny relationship with the church, or the church with sport. It's always considered sport a suspicious thing that it's never been quite sure about. And there have been some good reasons. So for example, back, even just under Roman rule in the early church, sport was often associated with pagan rituals full of idolatry, that kind of stuff that realistically the church and Christians should try to be avoiding. But not only that, the church is always thought of, not always, but generally thought of sport causing a lot of distraction. Ref! Are you kidding me, ref? Oh, who has paid this geezer? How has he missed that from there? He's one of our own. He's one of our own. Harry Kane. He's one of our own. Come on, you Spurs! Come on, you Spurs! Come on, you Spurs! And not only distraction, but it's been associated with other behaviours that maybe the church doesn't want to be involved with. For example, excessive drinking, and which, there's nothing wrong with drinking, but it's over the top stuff that they don't want to be associated with. Violence, gambling, even murder, that kind of stuff. So That's why the church has always kind of been hesitant towards sport. Yet, despite this, historically, the church, even though it has tried multiple times throughout history to get rid of sport, it's never really been that successful. And because of that, because it's never been able to get rid of sport, it's actually ended up trying to use sport for its own benefit. It's decided, you know what, sport is not going anywhere because sport's amazing, so why would it? And they've tried to use it for their own purposes. So for example, like a missionary work, trying to reach people with the gospel through sport. And the reality is that the church has had to face is that sport has been around for a long time, longer than the church. And so sport likely isn't going anywhere. Hey guys, just to quickly say, if you love sport and you love this book, please consider dropping a like on the video, subscribing to my channel, turning on notifications, all that good stuff, because it all helps support me and these videos and making more of them and having more fun. And I would really appreciate it. But anyway, let's get back to the theology of sport. Okay, so we've done the history. Now it's time to look at Lincoln's theological reflection about engaging with sport now. This is where I could really mess it up, but I'm gonna give it a go. To start off this reflection, Lincoln compares sport to play. This idea that all of us as humans, we have this like innate want to be able to play and to enjoy ourselves. You know, right from being a child, we do a lot of playing, and we play and we learn through playing as well. And there's a lot of benefits to it, and that stays with us as we become adults. You know, it might change slightly. For some of us it won't, and more power to you. But it will look how we relax, how we express what Lincoln would describe as like a freedom to play and enjoy, and just sport is part of that. He then talks about this geezer who, his name's really hard to pronounce if I'm being honest, but I'm gonna say it's like Huizinga, maybe. And he describes play as being like of serving nothing outside of itself, in the essence of making it kind of pointless because it doesn't create anything, it doesn't serve any role, and it's like within itself, it has no outward purpose. After deciding that sport is pointless, he then goes on to describe it as like a non-productive way to pass time. An interesting thought. And yet that may sound like a negative, calling something pointless and non-productive, but Lincoln would argue that that is a totally okay thing, that there is nothing wrong with something like sport being considered pointless and non-productive, and actually there's so much more in this world that falls into that category. Lincoln, from what I understand, argues that actually creation in itself can fall into that kind of pointless category itself, that in essence God didn't need to create. He didn't need to create the universe, he didn't need to create the earth, and he certainly didn't need to create us. He like brushes aside this myth that there was some itch in God that couldn't be satisfied until he'd done it, that actually God was completely contingent in his own being and he didn't need any of that, yet he chose to. And that means in itself, you know, the universe, the earth, us, creation, it doesn't have a point, it doesn't have a purpose in itself either. And that brings us on to an idea that whether we like it or not, Lincoln would argue that creation and us, we aren't necessary, that there's nothing that's relying on us, and that we are in essence pointless. However, much like sport, he would say that doesn't mean it were a bad thing, that actually that there can be so much good in that because God says what he created was good. And you know, at the end of the day, life is to be enjoyed in many ways. And so therefore, sport is something that is there, that is part of creation, that in itself may be pointless, but can still be enjoyed while we participate in it. So knowing that despite things being pointless, despite sport being in itself pointless, God says this is good, that creation is good. It still means we can enjoy it. And you know, Lincoln even describes sport as a gratuitous celebration of life. I mean, what a great way to express it. Sport is a celebration of life, and enjoying that innate desire in us to play. Theology aside, Lincoln also acknowledges that beyond its, whether it's necessary or it's not, that sport has so many benefits to it. Sport brings, I think, what can only be described as like a unique fellowship to it. Like, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, whether it's a sports team you're playing in or those people you train with, or even if, you just support a football team or a rugby team or American football or whatever it is. Within that, you can find a unique community of people who are all supporting or trying to achieve the same thing. And because of that, it has this amazing ability to bring people together. And also, sport is so good for our physical and our mental health. For a long time, we've probably known that sport and exercise as a whole is so good for us, for our bodies, keeping us physically fit and healthy. But also we know now that the endorphins we get from sport are so good for us mentally that going out running, being part of a team, just playing sport as a whole can be so good for our mental health as well as our physical. And the third thing, which I know he'd kind of be reluctant to say this, but sport can bring wealth and provision now. Whether you are a PE teacher in a school who teaches sport to young people, or whether you're a professional footballer who earns literally gazillions, sport can be a way of providing for yourself and your family now. And so knowing these things, that sport is, yes, pointless in many ways, but actually that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's part of the created order and it's part of our play. And the fact that sport has so many positive benefits towards us. Sport is going to be around for a while. I don't think it's going anywhere, and Lincoln doesn't think that either. And so therefore he suggests that the church needs to think about how it engages with sport in a really positive way. And yet, despite this, just to finish it off, Lincoln reminds us that, sport is great. Sport, like anything, in small doses, in non-controlling ways, when it is not the centre of our lives, it can be a really good thing. But there is a warning definitely for Christians, and if you're not a Christian, you're watching this, I still think this is something that can be applicable to you. That actually, when things get too consuming in our lives, when they become all consuming, our priority and our most important thing, that it can be dangerous and that can be damaging. And for us as Christians, we call this idolatry, when something instead of God takes that position in our life, when something is in a higher priority in our life than God. And as Christians, we need to be careful of that, because sport is incredible, but it is so easy to be drawn into that and to be prioritizing sport over everything else. At the end of the day, for us, God should always be number one. I guess I kind of have one main takeaway from this book, and it's kind of just something I'm going to personally reflect on in my life, and you might want to do this too. But I guess it's saying is what role does sports play in your life? So I love sport. I grew up playing loads of sport, and it's always been really important to me. Obviously, more recently, playing sport is a lot harder because of lockdown and corona and that kind of stuff. But I've been loving running recently, so I'm getting those physical and mental benefits of sport and exercise in. But for me, if you didn't already know and wasn't shown in my sort of distaste of Arsenal, I am a Tottenham Hotspur Football Club fan, and so I would say I'm a pretty big follower of them. I watch pretty much every game I can. I don't go because I don't live in London, plus it's quite expensive, but I watch online every game I can, which is pretty much every game, and it's something that I really prioritise and I really enjoy. Well, I don't always enjoy it because they're not always doing well, but you know what I'm saying. But my question for myself is that, on those days that they lose, I am low, I am angry, I'm getting annoyed with Steph, because I'm not actually annoyed with Steph, but I'm letting it pass on into my life. Or on those days when we win and we're doing really well, I'm ecstatic, I'm through the roof. And it completely changes my mood on that day. And I think my question is something, to be honest, I've been wondering a while, but this book has really brought out more, is where is sport? Where is my following of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club on my list of priorities? And maybe it's probably a bit too high up. Maybe right now it's having a bit too much impact on my life, where it's not. I'm not treating it as something that's pointless and playful, but actually it's something a bit more than that, where it's becoming a bit too controlling, a bit too yeah, too much in my life. And so that's something I'm definitely going to think about and sort of work out how can I approach this a bit better. So just to finish, sport is absolute quality. If you're anything like me, you are in love with sport. And if you've watched this far and you haven't, you're a weirdo because you're probably watching it for me, and that is weird. But this is such a quality book. It paints it out so clearly, even though, I may not be able to verbally process it back to you as well as the book is written. It is a quality book, which I would say is challenging and reflective and so useful. And I guess the thing is, we just have to find the balance, whether you're a Christian or not, to be honest, between where does sport lie in your life, and make sure it has a healthy place where it isn't too controlling, but it is there to be enjoyed. And at the end of the day, we need to remember that it is pointless, but it is there to be enjoyed. Right, there we go. That has been A Brief Theology of Sport by Lincoln Harvey. I love this book. Go check it out yourselves. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time.